So she was so fresh into the position. She didn't even fulfill her duties yet. She was just brand new. She was staying there for the holiday. It was a holiday weekend. And when the rockets went off at 6:30 in the morning, she didn't even know where to go because she didn't know the base yet. So she just followed the girl. They ran out into this safe room, and the terrorists came in and murdered 16 of them.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Yasmine Mohammed podcast. Today, I have a very, very special guest today. Her name is Ashley Waxman Bakshi. Ashley is an entrepreneur. She's actually one of Israel's most popular entrepreneur or vloggers, where she talks about makeup. But ever since October 7th, she has not been beauty blogging anymore. She has been talking about her 19-year-old cousin, Agam, who was kidnapped by the terrorists, Hamas. You might have already even seen pictures and videos of Agam. It's an incredibly difficult conversation that we're going to be having here today. And I'm very, very grateful to you, Ashley, for being so brave and talking to us today.
Thank you. Thanks, Yasmine. And I mean, brave is also what you're doing these days. And so I thank you in return for everything that you're doing and for also allowing space for us to come and speak about these things, difficult conversations. And yeah, so I'm happy to be here. I wish we were meeting under different circumstances, but maybe this will just be the beginning of a friendship. So
yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. I hope so too. I hope the next time that we chat, it's going to be in celebration of Agam coming home and all the other hostages.
amen.
So let's talk a little bit about your cousin. She has an identical twin sister. This broke my heart when I read that.
Not identical. They're not identical, but they are twins.
Oh, sorry. So she has a twin sister. And of course, as we know about twins, is they're always feeling each other. And I remember you saying in an interview once that her twin could still feel her. So that was beautiful. That was really good news. She loves sushi. She loves makeup. She is a typical 19-year-old girl in so many ways, but also she is incredibly resilient. I've read reports that she's been defiant in the face of these terrorists, in the face of her captors. When they have been forcing her to work on Shabbat, she has refused. I was like floored at that. The word, I don't even know what word fits that, like bravery, courageous, amazing, that none of these words even fit. Tell us about her. Tell us about her, as your cousin growing up, and also tell us about what you know about how she's surviving all of these past months and any news that you can share with us about her.
Absolutely. So I'll begin by saying that I grew up in Canada, and so I didn't know Agam very well until more recently. I moved to Israel. Maybe we can talk about this after, but I moved to Israel when I was 21 years old. And as you mentioned, I started beauty blogging. And one of the first times I had ever met Agam was when her grandmother called me in excitement saying, Agam is here. She needs to talk to you. She doesn't believe that you're her cousin. So she put me on the phone. And Agam was like, oh my God, Ashley, I love you. I watch all your videos. She was, I want to say 11.
Wow.
Something like that. She was really young. And so that's the first time I ever spoke to her. I mean, there's a big age difference as well, and so I knew her, obviously her father and her grandmother very, very well, but she was just a kid to me. And that's what really brought us together, is that she loved makeup just like me, and she looked up to me. And she followed all my videos, and she said that I was like a big inspiration for her. And it was since then that we became closer. My mom, who passed away actually just this February, she was like really, really, really close with Agam's grandmother. They were like best friends, going back 70 years. And they even had these fights between them about who would name their firstborn child after the grandfather and things like that. So they were really, really, really close. And so I had always been updated about everything through her grandmother and through her father. But again, you know, you're cousins, but there's a big age difference. She's 19, I'm 39. So we weren't that close. But basically, I'll tell you a little bit about her. So she grew up. Well, yeah, she grew up in like a very middle class, typical family. Her hobby was playing the violin, and she was really good at it. She started playing when she was 8. And so if you've seen, there's one video that's very famous that goes around social media of her playing Hallelujah on the violin. So if you've seen that, that's my cousin. And she was a special kid. So she's one of the observer soldiers, a female soldier in the IDF. And as you might probably know, every civilian in Israel goes to do the army for 2 years. She actually took a year off though before. So when she finished high school, she decided to take a year off because she wanted to volunteer with special needs kids and people who were like less fortunate. So she took a whole year off of her life to do what we call in Hebrew, it's called mechina. It's like a year that prepares you, for before the army. And she was just such a giving person. And she made like a mood board, which, I saw after she was kidnapped. Her parents, showed me. On the mood board, she did this when she was 16 years old, and they stick pictures of like what they want to do when they're older and all that kind of stuff. And she wanted to study psychology, so her big thing was helping people, and it was one of the reasons why she wanted to go volunteer. And she also has like really strong faith. So you mentioned that she refused to cook on Shabbat, and she believes in God very strongly. And so she wrote that, on the mood board, she wrote faith in God, faith in humanity, that she wants to travel. She wants to see the world. She loves nature. But those are like the things that, that are in her mind. She wrote herself a letter on her 19th birthday in her diary, which we found after she was kidnapped. And I always say this when I share this, I was like, when I was 19 growing up in Canada, if I would have wished anything for myself on my 19th birthday, it would have been like to pass my exams at university, to get a boyfriend, for my parents to buy me a car, like, those very, very materialistic things that we're used to. She literally wrote there that she wishes for unity amongst the Jewish people and for peace in Israel. Like that's what she wished for herself for her birthday. And all the videos of her and her friends, it's her laughing and singing and dancing. And when you see videos of her, you think in your head, okay, female soldier. So you think in your, in your mind, it's an adult. But she was so young and so fresh also in the army too. So the way it works is you do your basic training, which she went to be an observer, not a combat soldier. So it's very, very basic, like, 2 weeks training where they basically just teach you what the army structure is even like. And then they go do a course. So she did a course for a few weeks, teaching them how to, how to use the screens, how to do the position. And she actually had just finished the course. That's how young she was and fresh into the army, that she was assigned to that base, to the Nahal Oz base on the border with Gaza. And she arrived on that Thursday night before that Saturday. So she was so fresh into the position. She didn't even fulfill her duties yet. She was just brand new. She was staying there for the holiday. It was a holiday weekend. And when the rockets went off at 6:30 in the morning, she didn't even know where to go because she didn't know the base yet. So she just followed the girls. And because she had no idea and she was like frantic, she left her cell phone in the bedroom. They were sleeping. She left her phone in the room and she just ran after the girls. And so we didn't have any contact with her since the very, very beginning. The only contact we had was when she called and said, there's rockets. I'm trying to figure out where to go. And Shlomi, her dad, like calmed her down. He was like, okay, are you, you're probably going to go to the safe room. She was like, yeah. And he was like, okay, you'll be fine. As long as you're with the girls and you're in a safe room, you'll be fine. They hung up the phone. She left the phone there, and then that was it. And anything that we know about that day, many families, you know, especially the ones from the Nova Festival, a lot of them were like texting with their family members. So we weren't. And so whatever we know is from what other girls had shared with their parents through WhatsApp messages. And then we just connected the dots. And then many of you might have seen that video that we as the families decided to release a few weeks ago of when. So basically what happened was the terrorists, they came into the base and they killed 16 of her friends. There was basically this, I don't even know how to use, what to call it, but it's kind of like a safe room, but it's outside. And that's supposed to keep you sheltered from like mortars or rockets. And they were all the girls. So this position to be an observer is a women's only position in the army. So all the girls ran out. None of them have weapons. They ran out into this safe room, and the terrorists came in and murdered 16 of them right in front of their eyes. And then we now know that there was like, reminds us of the days of the Holocaust, but there was a certain process of selection between who would be kidnapped and who would be murdered. And I cannot tell you what the basis for that selection was, but just from the things that we heard them say in that video, when they spoke about you're beautiful, you know, I can't remember the exact term, but maybe you could help me with this, but there's like a term that they said there that under Islam, like you're allowed, sorry?
Sabaya,
exactly. So the IDF, like, you know, mistranslated it because it's hard to translate, but basically said, you know, we can get her pregnant. But essentially, it's not that they can get them pregnant, it's that they can turn them into sex slaves. And so as family members, you know, you see that, and it's the biggest nightmare that you could even imagine. But let's try to stay positive. We had sign of life, so that's important. So we know a lot about her whereabouts and well-being for the first, I think it was 53 days, because she was actually kept along with one of the other observers that, keep in mind, they didn't know each other yet because they were both fresh on base. So they weren't even friends at that point, but they were together along with an American couple. So Aviva and Keith Segal. Aviva was released in the first hostage agreement, and Keith is still in captivity. And so Aviva has shared with us many things. And that's how we know, for example, the story that you shared, that we know that she refused to cook on Shabbat. We also know that the terrorists touched the girls. We know that. She hasn't gone into further detail because she also told us, okay, wait, I'm trying to keep this concise, but we know that they were moved around in different homes. They were kept in a home for a long time where there was a family and children. And Agam would braid their hair, the children's hair, and she would try to play with them. And they were like, it's so weird to say this, but they almost were like treated okay because they were allowed to leave the room. We've heard of many hostages that weren't allowed to even, like, that they were chained or they weren't allowed to leave the room. Here they were allowed to go out into the kitchen and cook for them. Basically, the terrorists said to the two young girls, you're in charge of cooking for all of you guys. And when I mean cooking, it's not like, you know, steak dinners. It's the very, very minimum of food that they had. And there were periods of time where they had more food and there were periods where there was less food. We also know of a story where Agam refused to drink because they were kept in the room with the terrorists for a long time, and they had one bottle of water that they were all sharing, and she was like grossed out. She didn't want to share the bottle with the terrorists, and Aviva literally had to force her to drink because she said, if you don't drink, you're gonna end up, they're gonna take you to a hospital, they're gonna kill you. I'm not staying here without you. Nothing's happening, you have to drink. And so eventually she agreed to drink from the bottle. And so they were in that home for a bit, and then they were moved around, you know, from different apartments to different apartments. They were dressed up, you know, in hijab and all that to be moved around inside Gaza. We also know, the last thing we know about her whereabouts was when the hostage deal went through, they basically moved everyone into the tunnels. And every day more and more people were being released. And so that's where a lot of people saw each other, in the tunnels. And so that's where Aviva had also seen other girls that were also from the Nova. And so what I'm about to say, I don't know if we're speaking about Agam, if we're speaking about the other girl that was with Agam, or any of the other girls that she saw in the tunnel. But she did say that young women had shared with her that they were raped under gunpoint, but they asked her not to tell the parents because they wanted to tell on their own when they come home. And so we know for a fact that this is happening. But just imagine the burden that is on these hostages that were then released, that have this information and don't know, should I share it? Should I not share it? What should I be telling? They want to respect the girls, also their wishes. And think about how many of these women and men have gone through sexual abuse and didn't share it with anyone. And so we don't even know it yet. And so these are our biggest nightmares. And that's why, we were dreading like the 9-month mark. And the Israeli leader, the commander of the Mossad, said this week that the young girls are running out of time and that every minute and every day is critical for them. And so, he didn't go into details why, but we can only imagine, like, if someone right now is 8 months pregnant or 9 months pregnant and she needs to give birth in a tunnel underground with no air, with no access to medicine, anything. I mean, that's our biggest fear. Yeah. So that's where we are right now. I have many stories to share about her, but I mean, I don't want to take up everyone's time just sharing about the stories. But another story, for example, that we know is that
Ashley, that's why you're here. You're not taking up our time. You are our time. We are here for you. Please continue.
Thank you. So one of the things that we know is, so one of the terrorists that was watching them, their guardian, I don't even know how to call it, he actually like respected her in a way because she said, I don't cook on Shabbat. Because for him, he was like, you believe in Allah? And she was like, yes, I believe in Allah. And he was like, okay, well then if it's for that, then, I like, there was a certain level of respect there because she wasn't an infidel or whatever. And so it just, it really, there's a lot of perspectives about this conflict right now that many people are missing. There's so many different layers to it. There's a political layer, there's a territorial layer, there's a socioeconomic status layer to it as well. But unfortunately, and I really wish this wasn't the case, because if this wasn't the case, it'd be so much easier to solve this conflict. But there's a strong religious layer to this conflict that story just, I come, for many, many years, I come from like the political left, where I always believed in a two-state solution. I always believed that if only the Palestinians had a state, the conflict would end. Mm-hmm. And the longer I'm in Israel, the longer I no longer believe that. And it really explains, how I see people in the West. Again, I'm Canadian, so I follow Canadian media. I follow what's happening around the world, and I see everybody, complaining about the fact that Israel is so extreme right-wing and all this stuff. They need to understand that this country has moved to the right because of all the things that we've endured over the past however many years. There's only so long that you can keep putting your faith and trust in the other side and believing a certain narrative that the world wants you to believe, until you're like, I think October 7th was that last straw, where even people who were very, very far left on the political spectrum, specifically the people who were in those kibbutzes and those agricultural towns around the Gaza envelope, who were the people that were literally bringing in Palestinian children from Gaza to take them to our hospitals. And it was them who got the most brutally massacred in their homes. And so even people who were extremely left wing are now speaking very, very differently. Maybe not necessarily about our internal politics, Bibi Netanyahu and so on, but certainly with how they feel that we can solve the conflict is no longer, yes, let's push two-state solution, give back land in exchange for peace. We are not there anymore. And so to hear the world continue to enforce, a solution that unfortunately right now the Israelis don't want because they don't trust, and the Palestinians never really wanted, then pushing that from the outside just shows how tone deaf the West is and how they don't understand what's happening here on the ground.
Yeah, I unfortunately completely agree with you. One of the first articles I wrote about this was released on October 10th, where I said exactly that. I was like, well, we're done now. Like, that's it. It's over. I was talking about my dad, who is from Gaza and was a peace activist, and I really felt like I was glad in a way that he wasn't alive to see his dream of, one day his homeland being, back the way it was when he was growing up, that it was never going to be like that again. He would talk about the days before Yasser Arafat, and he always hoped that, there would be an independent Gaza that was not, just infected by terrorists. But unfortunately, I said at that day, I said, in an area with so many olive trees, an abundance of olive branches that they could have extended, instead they chose to do this. So we're done here. Like, how can you even ask the question? How can you ever ask any country to, we always talk about, we don't negotiate with terrorists, we don't negotiate with terrorists. And if this had happened to any other country in the world, I mean, look how America reacted to Japan, right? And especially, we can't forget the history, and especially the Jewish people. Like, we can't forget that that Israel is made up of Jewish people that were thrown out of countries all over Europe, North Africa, all over the Middle East. And so this was like, they came as refugees to their homeland, the one place where they could feel safe. And even on this one tiny little strip of land, they can't even feel safe. And people love to say, oh, it's an ethno state, and there shouldn't be religious states. And it's like, there's 57 Muslim majority countries. I've never heard you make a peep about them. And there's how many Christian countries? In God we trust, you've got written on your money. You know what I mean? Like, nobody has a word to say about that. There's just such a, this already, but the hypocrisy is very frustrating for me. And you're right, the Arabs, especially more so even than the Palestinians, never wanted there to be a two-state solution. In some ways, Palestinians, mostly Gazans, actually wanted it the most because they were the ones who were suffering under Hamas.
Yeah, I
But
should
the
correct
other Arab
myself. When I said
states,
Palestinians, I meant to say Palestinian leadership,
yeah,
corrupt
for
leadership. That's
sure.
what I meant to say, not the people, for sure.
Absolutely. You're right. And it's not just the Palestinian leadership, it's Iranian leadership, it's Iraqi leadership, it's Jordanian leadership, it's Egyptian leadership, it's all of them. This conflict is good for them. I'm happy to see some changes, of course, in the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Morocco, and there's some positive things happening. But this is, we've got a long way to go. Like, we're living through a very important time in history right now, a very treacherous time. Like we're on the precipice of, we can either get this right or we can get this very, very wrong. Which brings me to a question which wasn't even written here because this news hadn't come out yet. But how are you feeling about, I know we're Canadian, you and I, but as they say, when America sneezes, Canada gets a cold. Like we are always picking up everything that goes on there. It feels like it's happening to us. And this is America that we're talking about. It's the world's superpower. Whoever's leading America, it's very important. All of us were really panicked about Biden at the helm, right? We all felt like this is a man that needs to go home and spend some time with his grandkids. Like, just leave him alone at this point. So I'm glad that he dropped out of the race. But how are you feeling about Kamala Harris? Are you feeling like, okay, go ahead.
Again, I mean, on my social media, when I, God forbid, say anything about American politics, people literally lose their shit on me because, but I don't like her. I'm very, very fearful for her to be the leader of the free world. I don't trust her in terms of her policy. For her, any of her foreign policy, for that matter, not only Israel. But I mean, aside the point, I just find her very, very flaky on her policy when you really look back at where she began, where she is now. If you look at her failures of the border. So if I was American, I don't think definitely wouldn't be voting for her. It's not, and I want to say when it comes to Trump, okay, it's not that I think Trump is such a great leader, and certainly he has so many flaws. But when I look at who is going to be the leader of the free world, I look at it from my Israeli perspective, from my Israeli glasses, and for what affects me. So again, I'm saying this not as someone who is American, because I'm not. But if I look at the things that that Trump achieved in his 4 years, he brought peace to many countries in the Middle East. Like, he brought the Abraham Accords.
Well, the Abraham Accords, exactly.
And if there's something that I understand, that I've heard, is that the Abraham Accords could have already been expanded with Saudi Arabia and a few other states as well. And it was only because it was one of Trump's projects that Biden didn't keep pushing on that and didn't want to give it that space. And so that's one thing that I look at it from an Israeli perspective, just the fact that I can actually go to Dubai. And many Israelis after October 7th were going to Dubai because they felt safer there than they did in Europe. So that just shows how much some things have changed in the Middle East because of Trump. He recognized Jerusalem as our capital. He recognized the Golan. He did things from Israeli perspective that no U.S. leader ever had the guts to do for many, many decades. And so as an Israeli, I think all Israelis at this point, again, putting aside the fact that if we're more right wing or more left wing right now, literally goes out the window post October 7th. We're looking at who do we believe will be the best leader in America for Israel and for the Jewish people. And I think the vast majority of Israelis right now are hoping it will be Trump, which is crazy, because if you would have asked me the previous time, I would have been like, oh no, I would never vote Trump. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think exactly what you said. A lot of things just get thrown out the window with this right-left binary that we've got going on here. You grew up, you always identified on the left, so did I. For you, it was the Israel issue that made you feel abandoned by your fellow liberals. For me, it was, of course, the Muslim Islamic issue. That's what made me feel like I could no longer belonged. So, there's and for a lot of people, it's these current women's issues that are making people feel like they no longer identify with the left. So there's lots of different reasons why people are feeling that the left no longer is no longer liberal, and it doesn't speak for liberal people. But let's talk about your background. So it's interesting. We talked about the fact that we're both Canadian, but we also both have Egyptian heritage. Yeah. Yes. So tell us about that.
So I'm actually trying to, unfortunately, like I said, my mom passed away in February, and my mom knew everything. And unfortunately, I don't have many people to ask anymore because her sister passed away also. But I remember, like, I know as a child, like my whole life, my mom always told me, this is the story I have, okay? So from my mom's side of the family, from my grandmother, my mom's mother, they were for forever and for always from the area of Hebron in Israel. So in Arabic, it's El Khalil, and that's, you know, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are buried. And in around the 1820s, from my understanding, so under still Ottoman rule, there wasn't much work. Like, people have to understand that Palestine under the Ottomans was like not a very good place to live. It wasn't so like amazing. There was no economy. It was basically like desert land. And so many people, the majority of the Jews who lived in Israel at the time were there for very, very religious reasons. Because if you weren't so religious, you didn't want to be there. It wasn't like a good place to be. And so they left around the 1820s, and my family was religious. They were very, very religious. They were like rabbis in their past and everything. They left to Cairo for work. And I think, I can't tell you exactly how many generations back this would have been, but I think it was like my mom's great grandfather. So his brother was actually murdered in Cairo walking to synagogue on Sabbath. And it really freaked them out. And so they were like, we're not staying here. And so they were deciding if they should go back, you know, to Palestine or what they should do. And they ended up going from there to Romania. And I'm researching this now a little bit more. And apparently it's like a thing that many people from Egypt actually left to countries like that, like Romania, because Jewish families, because the economic situation was a bit better there. And there weren't that many, like in Romania, for example, there weren't as many pogroms as in Ukraine and other countries at the time. And so that's how that side of my family arrived in Romania. And their last name was Schwartz, which in Yiddish, Schwarz means black. And so it was almost like a derogatory term because they had come from Egypt and they were, you know, dark. They weren't even that much darker, to be honest. Outside of my mom's family, they all have like blue eyes and green eyes. But that's how they got that last name. So that's an interesting story. The other side of my family is very typical Ashkenazi story. My father's father, so my grandfather, he was actually killed in a tragic accident on like the last day of the war. So my dad was born in June of 43 at home in a small town in Romania. And so this was during the Holocaust, and they hid out there. But his father was taken to a labor camp, and he actually was able to escape the labor camp. He found a bike, and he was like riding his bike all the way home. And then the Russians came and liberated Romania, and they had put up a check post right at the entrance of his village. And when he was there, they stopped him and they said, show us papers. And he was like talking, I don't know exactly what was happening, but he was standing there like with his bike, and a military vehicle, a Russian military vehicle, they were like drunk drivers in this military vehicle, and they just ran through the check post and ran him over, like right at the entrance of the village. It was like a very, very tragic story. And like all the Jews of the town heard about it. And so my dad actually never really met his dad. My dad was only two years old when that happened. And then
imagine escaping a labor camp and then, oh my God.
Yeah. So that's why I keep the name Waxman, by the way, because I got married to Bakshi, but I keep the name Waxman because for my dad, that name was always so important because that was the only thing he had from his father that he never knew. And my grandmother ended up in 1950. So after they established the state of Israel, her and my father, they ended up making Aliyah and coming to Israel. And my mom's side of the family, so my mom was my grandmother and my grandfather. They were living in Bucharest at the time of the Holocaust, and they both had professions. So my grandmother was a seamstress, and my grandfather was a barber, and they were both taken to work for the Nazis. One was cutting hair for Nazis, and my grandmother was sewing SS uniforms. And so that's how they managed to stay alive. And then my grandfather somehow managed to escape, returned back to Bucharest, and a non-Jewish woman, a Romanian woman who was one of the neighbors, took him in and hid him. And her name was Clarissa. And so when the war was over, and my grandmother came back, and they basically, I asked my mom the story so many times because I wanted so many more details, but she didn't know. I was like, how did they know where each other was the whole time? How did they meet up? And these are like stories that have gotten lost in history. But what I know is the war was over. They came back, they met in the apartment, and my mom was born in January of 46. And after she was born, and the funny thing is many years later, my mom she wanted to get a Romanian passport, and she went to find her birth certificate. There's this different woman written on my mom's birth certificate, not her mother. And so this set off this whole conspiracy in my head of like, oh, what was grandpa up to? And the elder people in the family were like, no, it was something that because of the horrors and the trauma, they would take a non-Jewish woman and ask her to like be the mom on the birth certificate so that no one would know that the child was Jewish. And yeah, crazy story. So because anyways, long crazy stories. So my mom was born in January of 46, and they ended up coming on a boat, one of the illegal immigration boats, to British Mandate Palestine. And then the British soldiers didn't allow them to dock at the port of Haifa because they were stopping, the incoming of refugees from after the Holocaust, because they were trying to appease the Arabs that were here. And they were sent, they were taken off the ship and then put onto British deportation ships and sent to Cyprus to be encamped there. And they were only allowed to come into Israel. I think it was after the partition was voted in. I think that's when they started to allow them to come in. So my mom was actually the youngest baby on that boat. My grandparents walked through the snow, February or March 46, something like that. Through the snow, they walked all the way from Romania to the ports of Yugoslavia, like crazy.
Oh,
it really makes you appreciate like the life that we have.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, every Jewish person I speak to has like this just generational trauma, like every single generation. And even like what you're going through and what Agam is going through, like this there's never a generation that is left untouched. And it's just horrific global stories of mass violence and terrorism and just unbelievable difficulties. So
that's why
it makes you just appreciate that Jewish people even exist today. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Exactly. No, I was just going to say it really puts into context what Jews feel when they are massacred. I grew up, so I'll expand a little bit more. So my parents, they were both, they grew up in Israel. So my mom entered when she was a baby. My dad was like 5 years old, and they both grew up in Israel, got married here. My dad fought in the 6-Day War and in the Yom Kippur War, was injured in both, very, very traumatized in the Yom Kippur War because his job was to go up to the Golan Heights and take the bodies and bring them down to like the field hospital. And one of the traumatic stories is that my mom's cousins, so she had 2 cousins and they were 2 years apart from each other. One was like 20 and one was 22, something like that. They were both fighting. And my dad went in, pulled out bodies, found one of the cousins, had to call home. That's how the family found out that he had been killed. And then like a week later, found the body of his brother and had to call home and tell them about that as well. And so my dad, and then on top of everything, one of the days when he was in there, his armed vehicle, it was called a Zelda, like in the 70s. I don't know what you would even call it today. It's not a tank, it's like a mini tank. So like an armed vehicle or whatever. So he was hit and it lit on fire, and he tried to like rescue the bodies that were with him, but he wasn't able to, and he was only able like at the last minute to take himself out, and he was very, very badly injured and then taken to hospital. And at the same time, this is like what life was like for my parents. When I tell these stories, I'm like, I should have been a better child. I should have been more appreciative. But at the same time, my youngest brother out of my three older brothers, he was a baby at the time and he had meningitis. And so she rushed him to the emergency room and he was checked into the hospital. And then my dad was brought into the exact same hospital. And my mom told me that for like 6 weeks, she was going in between the floors, like between my baby brother and my dad who was injured. And also like war and everything and like her cousins being killed and everything. So he was very PTSD. They were very angry at Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan and how did they let, that this happen, just like many people are angry now at Netanyahu and our government. How did they allow for this to happen? And he was like, I'm not staying here. My three young boys are not going to go through what I went through. I'm not going to allow them. And they immigrated to Canada. They came actually first to Montreal, but because they didn't have good French, they ended up going to Hamilton, Ontario, and that's where I was born. So I was born in 85. They left in 79. I was born in 85. And my entire life, I was a daughter of immigrant parents, but I was always Canadian. I was always like a really proud Canadian. I was always Canadian before I was Jewish, before I was Israeli. I always, my parents spoke Hebrew at home. Every summer we used to go back to, visit my grandparents who were still in Israel at the time. But I was such a proud Canadian and almost in a excessive way, like almost, I remember like my parents used to speak to me in Hebrew. I would not answer them in Hebrew, only in Canada. I was almost embarrassed of it. And I grew up like in a Jewish community. I went to a Jewish school. It wasn't and I know now as an adult and after reading all these books about like anti-Semitism and the Jewish experience and whatever. And I think this is a lot of what we're seeing as well with many, many Jewish people in the diaspora who are claiming to be anti-Zionist today. It's like this generational trauma that you described of, if only I will fit in, if I'll just be like everyone else, then I won't be hated, right? And I think that was so subconscious. Like I had no idea that this is what I was doing, but I was always like, don't call it a hat, it's a toque. I'm going to a hockey game. I was like excessively.
That's straight Tim Hortons.
Exactly. And I only changed. In fact, I didn't like Israel as a child. When I used to come here as a child, I would be like, it's too hot. There's too many bugs. People are rude. People are aggressive. There's bombs, everywhere. Buses are blowing up. I don't want to go to Israel.
There's that.
And right. And it was only when I went to university for the first time. So when I was 17 years old, I went to Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo. And my very first anti-Semitic experience ever happened there. Because if you would have asked me when I was 17 years old, is there anti-Semitism in Canada? I'd be like, no, oh my God, like that was 1930s Germany. That doesn't exist anymore, And basically what happened was I went to school there and I didn't really know many people because most of my friends we ended up moving to Toronto when I was 13 years old. So all my friends and most of the Jewish people in Canada go to Western or they go to York or there's a few places. I was like the only one to go to Laurier. And when I got there was open door day in orientation week, and so everybody had like their doors open and you would walk between dorms and meet people. And I walked in and very politely, like everyone else, I removed my shoes, put them at the foot of the door, walked in, and we ended up having this conversation about like what languages do we speak. And so some people were like, oh, I speak French, I speak Spanish, oh, I know Mandarin. And I was like, I know Hebrew. And the guy who it was his room, he turns to me in front of everyone. There was like 10 people in the room. And he looks at me and he goes, what do you speak? And I was like, well, I know Hebrew. Like my parents speak Hebrew. I know Hebrew. I'm not fluent, but I know Hebrew. And he was like, why? And I was like, well, I'm Jewish. Like my parents are Israeli. I went to Jewish school, so I know how to read and write as well. And he looked at me and he goes, you're Jewish? And I was like, yeah. And he goes to me, which shoes are yours? And at the beginning, I was like, what does that have to do with anything, right? So I like walk over to the door and I'm like, these ones. And he picks them up and he goes, these are your shoes? And I'm like, yeah, what does that have to do with anything? He walks over to the window, opens it and throws it out the window. Am I allowed to curse on your podcast?
Yes.
He goes to me, get the fuck out of my room, you fucking kike. And I look at him and I go, and I had no idea what that word even meant. I had never heard it before. And so I thought it was a joke. And I was like, what am I missing here in the joke? Like, I was just, didn't get it. I honestly didn't get that I should be offended or anything. Everybody in the room was like dead silent. Nobody said anything. And he like looks at me like I'm serious. And so I go out and I'm all like confused, right? Like, you know, when something happens and then you don't remember the few minutes after because your mind was somewhere else. I honestly don't even remember how I got there, but I got to like, you know, looking for my shoes, found my shoes. I remember looking up to see like what room was maybe his, like maybe the window was still open, because I was almost waiting for him to be like, I'm just kidding, like come back,
Yeah.
you know? And I was like, okay. And so I was just so confused. I went back to my room and I literally started Googling, what is a kike? And I wrote it like Kyke, nothing. And I was like, Kike, nothing. Like I couldn't even find it. And then I was like, did it have something to do with me being Jewish? So I was like, kike Jewish. And then I realized that it's like a derogatory word for Jew. And I found out where it comes from, where it stems from and everything. And I was like, did that actually happen? Anyways, I ended up seeing him on campus many, many times after, but obviously never said anything to him. Some people did come up to me after and they were like, hey, I just want you to know I was in the room when that happened. I'm really sorry I didn't say anything, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But that was
useless.
Yeah, so people,
that's our useless Canadians.
But
Go ahead.
I think they were in shock too, to be honest. Like, you know, the majority of the people, I think, obviously whatever. But keep in mind, we were 17 years old. You know, you were kids.
Yeah, that's true. You know, unfortunately, 17-year-olds in Canada today are not going to have that experience that you did of being like so shocked, because anti-Semitism in Canada is just through the roof. Like it's so embarrassing. Like from October 8th, it was just like they just thought it was free for all time. And I'm not just talking about other kids. I'm talking about like grown adults. Like one of the first things that I saw, there was a university in Montreal where a professor was yelling at one of the students and calling her a sharmuta, which is an Arabic word for a whore or a prostitute. And then he's telling her, go back to Poland, go to Poland. And you have to know that when they say that, they don't mean Poland, they mean Auschwitz. They know exactly what they're saying. He doesn't know if she's Polish, if her family is Polish or not, but that's what they're saying, right? Yeah. And then, of course, we have all of the, you know, the support of Iran all over Canada. Unfortunately, all of the chants asking Iran to burn Tel Aviv to the ground. And the pro-Hamas, like openly pro-Hamas people spray painting and with their bullhorns, you know, not to mention the violence that's been going on, the synagogues and the Jewish schools. I mean, it's beyond humiliating as a Canadian to see how dark our country is, you know, like that was just so, like you said, like we didn't even know it was that bad. Like, of course, anti-Semitism exists, right? Racism exists, like, you know, it's there, but it's like it's like the kindling was all set. And on October 7th, something just lit up where they all felt so empowered that they could just come out of the woodwork, come out into the light. And it's so humiliating that Canada is at the top of the list. You know, how anti-Semitism has risen in our country, like 500% or something atrocious like that. And still, our government and our leaders are going on and on about Islamophobia.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not anti-Semitism, right? It's only anti-Zionism.
Yeah, clearly.
Right.
Clearly, right. Anti-Zionism. What happened to you? That was anti-Zionism, right? Calling the poor child a sharmuta and telling her to go back to Poland, that's anti-Zionism. Like, that is such it's not even a good code word. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, you're not even good at pretending. People are like, oh, the mask has slipped. I'm like, they didn't even bother with the mask. They don't even have to, because nobody cares. And I'm sorry to say that the cowardice of those people in that room, I don't care that they were 17-year-olds. If you were a Black kid and he called you the N-word, they wouldn't be sitting there surprised. Oh, I don't know what to do. I'm only 17. They would have reacted. Okay?
Yeah.
They choose not to, right? And that's why our country has become as bad as it is, because we're just a bunch of gutless cowards trying to be nice all the time, right? And what does nice get you?
Right.
This is
And
what nice
so,
gets you. Yeah, go ahead. I'm like just have to stop ranting about how horrified I am.
anyways, I started my studies and I studied business. And again, I wasn't like, I never defined myself as a huge Zionist because that wasn't something that was like super important to me. I was always like, yeah, I'm Canadian, I'm Jewish, whatever. And to be honest, I never even really believed in God, even though I had been raised in a more religious family. And I was very like, I just want to go to school. I want to get a good degree. I want to get a good job. I want to make lots of money. That's what I want to do in life. I don't care about anything else. And when I just turned 18, so right before Christmas vacation, it was December 2003, I was offered to go on Birthright. And it was very new at the time, so I didn't really know much about it. And I was like, what do you mean? What is it? And they're like, it's a free 2-week trip to Israel. And I was like, oh, I've been to Israel a million times. Like, no. And they were like, you can drink alcohol there. Legally, because in Canada it's 19, right? And they were like, in Israel you can drink when you're 18, and it's a trip with boys and whatever. I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'll come.
On second thought.
So I went on Birthright completely with the mindset of I'm going to have fun. And something happened on that trip. I was taken to places that I had never been before because my parents used to come and we would visit family. So I'd never even been to like Masada. I didn't even go to like, I went with my mom to the Wailing Wall, to the Western Wall. I had seen her like crying and putting in notes and standing looking at her like, are you okay, Mom? Like, but to be there in a trip and then to have Jews from all over the world, Argentina and France and Morocco, and we all come together, everyone's singing the same prayers, the same songs. For over 2,000 years, we brought in the Shabbat there at the wall. And seeing Jews from all over the world come together and like saying literally the same prayers for 2,000 years of praying to return to Zion. And then me standing there going, for 2,000 years, my ancestors have longed for this moment. And I'm taking this so for granted. And that's when like something happened in me. And I was like, wow, this place is really special. And then they took us to the north and I saw the places. They took us to the Golan. My dad had never taken me to the Golan as a child because he was PTSD. He didn't want to go back there. Mm-hmm. But I had heard, and they took us to one of the places. It's called the Valley of the Tears. Big battle happened there. Many people died. And they were telling us how people would come in and have to remove the bodies. And I was like, this was my dad. Oh my God. Made me feel something else. And then also on that trip, and mind you, between 2001 and 2003, I didn't come to Israel because I was super scared because of the Second Intifada. And we were driving along the road that takes us north. And the person comes, the tour guide comes on the bus microphone and they're like, have you guys heard of the new apartheid wall? And some people were like, yeah. I was like, no, I didn't even hear about it. They were like, look on your right. This is the wall. And I was like, oh, okay. It looks like a highway wall. I don't know I don't even know what this person's talking about. And then I came back to university, and sure enough, a few weeks later, there was Apartheid Week on my campus. The Muslim Students Association from a University of Waterloo across the street did this whole thing, and not only in Waterloo, they brought it to Laurier as well, even though they weren't students at that university. We now know that this is something that they do. And they brought a huge wall and started showing all these pictures, and I was like, what are they talking about? I was literally just there. It's not what they're making it sound like. So I was like, wait, what is this wall? Whatever. I start researching. I start looking things up myself. I bought a book, like for the first time in my life, the first book I ever bought. And this is funny because I'm a child to Israeli parents. You would think I would know something, but I didn't. The first book I bought was the Middle East conflict, maybe the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for dummies. That's the first book I ever read about it because I was like, I need to start understanding what are they talking about. And it just, the more I had started seeing these pro-Palestinian protests on my campus, this was 20 years ago, the more I was like, but that's not true. But that's not true. Why are they talking about why the security wall is being built? Why are they talking about the fact that there's suicide bombing? Why are they not talking about Oslo? Because I knew about Oslo. I remember the day coming home from the library and seeing my mom crying in front of the TV when Yitzhak Rabin was shot. There were certain things that I had known from being the daughter of an Israeli, but I right away picked up that something bigger was happening on my campus and there was nobody doing anything about it. And so quickly I organized a few students, none of whom were Jewish. It was like really awesome, just Christian Canadian kids who believed in Israel's right to defend itself that helped me. And we started doing things like Israel Week and, you know, little things like that. And I was going about it all wrong back then. I thought that by showing the good aspects of Israel, showing how diverse our culture is, showing them that, you know, we're not in apartheid, because I never understood why people were calling it an apartheid. I was like, if I just show them that, you know, Arabs serve in the IDF, then they're going to get it. And they're going to be like, oh, okay, it's not an apartheid. I was very, very naive. I thought that like showing them how Israel has so many Nobel Prizes and such an amazing high-tech industry that people will be like, oh, okay, Israel's cool. It didn't work. But what happened was I got threatened. And I actually had a letter written to me from, I knew who it was. It was a student he was an Afghani student, and I had never seen him in any of my classes, but he was on campus all day protesting. He wrote me a letter saying that he was going to kill me if I didn't stop. And I had my room broken into and the Israeli flag stolen from my room and cut up into a million pieces and burned outside for me to see. And I started to feel a little bit unsafe. And so I ended up leaving Laurier. And then my final year I did at York University, where I felt much more protected. There was already like a big Hillel, which is like the Jewish Students Organization. And we were already protesting. And I'd like to share also a story for, you know, people who were really, really shocked about what was happening on campuses this year, because I wasn't. So this was 2006. And there were big, you know, pro-Israel, anti-Israel rallies. We used to go, we used to yell at each other. Sometimes things would get into like pushing and shoving, never with the girls. It was more between the guys. And there was one guy there who, because I was, you know, active there and he was active on the other side, we knew each other. His name was Ahmed. He knew my name was Ashley. We used to yell at each other in protests and rallies. And then when it was all done, we'd be like, want to go have a smoke together? And then we'd go outside and have a smoke together. And we would talk. And I think that, first of all, it's a big difference between 20 years ago and today. Like back then, we would be able to have these conversations, but then also be able to be friends. And today, obviously not. And also back then, you had no faculty or administration taking part in these at all. It was students against students, and it was freedom of speech, and it was cool. But one day, we're outside and we're talking, and I go to him, Ahmed, I've never seen you in class. Like, how do you have the time to literally be here all the time, just on campus, only for protesting? Like, I was in class. Like, and he looks at me and he goes, this is my 8th year at York. And I'm like, I don't get it. Like, do you not want to graduate? And he was like, I don't go to class. I'm just here. And I was like, I wasn't even smart enough back then to think like, who's funding you? You know what I mean? Like, who's paying for all this tuition for you not to go to class? I mean, I didn't even think about it. I literally just said to him like, oh, like do you just not want to grow up? Like, you just want to stay in university? I was so naive that I didn't understand what was even happening. Years later, when I was already graduated and lived in Israel, I had met a student who was active on York University campus. I was telling them the story, and the guy was in a wheelchair. So I said, there was a guy in a wheelchair or whatever. And the student looked at me and she goes, Ahmed? And I'm like, no, don't tell me he's still there. He was still there. I think he must have been 15 years on campus doing this. And so when people say that this is funded, this is strategic, this is calculated, this goes back many, many years, I wasn't shocked when I saw what was happening on university campuses, unfortunately, at all. And basically in my final semester, so this was the summer of 2006, the second Lebanon war broke out. And I felt like I needed to be in Israel. I was like, that's it. Like, something in my heart was calling me. I was like, this is my homeland. I believe in every right of the country to exist. I want to be a part of it. And I see the way like Canada's going. I see what's happening in the West. I came to Israel. I served in the IDF, and I did my master's degree in counterterrorism and homeland security. And I did my thesis back then on the radical ideologies of the Muslim Brotherhood and how I see this connecting to Hamas. And what happened on October 7th was no shock to me, unfortunately. Yeah,
that was actually one of my questions, because I'm saying, like, if you have a master's degree in counterterrorism and homeland security, and so obviously what happened on October 7th was surprising to a lot of people, and like you said, it wasn't surprising to you at all. I'm really impressed at how you've devoted your time and energy to speaking up and correcting the misinformation and exposing the lies and propaganda. Sounds like you started doing that in university and you just continued doing it. But what really impressed me was that you're even engaging young Muslims in conversation online. And I am really shocked and amazed, because that takes a lot of resiliency and graciousness, because your cousin was taken hostage. And so for you to be able to open your heart and your mind and to like have these conversations is quite impressive. So tell us about those conversations that you're having.
Well, I believe that all people are inherently good. And I think that it's outside forces that manipulate them. And as someone who, I've read the Quran, I've studied the three, major religions, and I think each religion is inherently good and wants to bring good to civilization. And it bothers me when people use religion to bring evil onto civilization. And I will say this, we have seen this in every single religion. So this is not something that is specific to Islam. We have seen, Jews have been massacred in the name of Christianity in the past. There are radical religious Jews that I strongly oppose, and especially how should I say, here, especially in Israel, the way they use religion to manipulate internal politics as well. I'm strongly opposed to that. And so, like I was saying, I believe that people are inherently good. It's when they're misinformed that hatred can be bred. And one of the things that I think is detrimental for our situation with the Palestinians is actually the disengagement from Gaza. And I'll explain. Because, and I was all for the disengagement in 2005. Like I said, I came from more of a left, perspective, and I was always in the mindset of land will get peace, land for peace. But I think it was a mistake, because if we look now at what's happening in the West Bank, you cannot compare. I think there can really be peace tomorrow with the West Bank, because there is interaction between Muslims and Jews, Arabs and Jews, every single day. My husband works in the West Bank. He works with 100 Palestinians that are not Israeli citizens. And we humanize each other because we see each other. The young generation that grew up in Gaza since the disengagement has never seen a Jew. And so it was so easy for the Hamas to incite them, to manipulate them, that Jews are evil, Jews are the devil, Jews want to kill you, Jews, whatever, obviously using Nazi propaganda in UNRWA schools, as we've seen. And so I believe that when we tear down these walls and we interact, that's like the only way forward. I am very open to recognizing Palestinian grievances. I had Palestinian friends living in Canada who shared with me that their grandparents fled in the war of 1948 to Lebanon and then weren't allowed to return. And that, and I've heard these stories. And again, looking people to people, hearing the stories, I am able to say that there are Palestinian grievances. Some can be dealt with. Some unfortunately cannot, because we're going back in history now at this point to 80 years. So there's some things that cannot be reversed. And unfortunately, that's an outcome of war. But the fact that I can recognize their aspirations is already something, you know what I mean? The problem is that so many people have never actually heard the Jewish experience, the Israeli experience, that they can't even recognize that we have our own grievances and our own aspirations, and we're not just some white European colonial projects. That's not what we are. And so I think everything that I do online, I think the most important thing that I do online is engaging with the people who are not necessarily Muslim, but the people who are not pro-Israel and that still have an open mind and that they're willing to listen. Because we know that at the end of the day, there's going to be 10, 20, even 30% of the population that is like, no, I just don't want to hear. I don't care what you have to say. We see this in the protests of people going up and saying, and I've done this too, let's have a conversation. And people are like, I don't engage with Zionists. And I'm like, okay, well, all right, we're definitely going to have peace now, right? If you don't want to engage with me, how can we ever have peace if we don't engage? It's the only way. And so I would say there's still 60, 70% of the population who is willing to engage, and we must engage. That's the only way, because as someone who wants an end to this conflict, and this is like the big difference that we see between Israelis who live here and the protesters on Western campuses, is that they have no actual vested interest in what happens in this conflict. I am raising 4 children here. I don't want to send them off to the army. I don't want to have to build every home with a bomb shelter in it. I don't want to have to walk down the street like I do every single day, looking a million times behind me to see that there's not somebody with a knife coming to stab me. I don't want to live like that. I want peace. And I say that not because when I tell people that I want a better life for Palestinians, they think I'm disingenuous. Like they honestly think that I'm just saying it because it's a talking point. And I'm like, no, don't you understand that if the Palestinians have it good, I'll have it good? Like that's, I see it that way. If it'll be good for them, it'll be good for me. I want it good for everyone. Unfortunately, and what I just said is a very leftist mindset, right? And I'm telling you, that's where I came from. Unfortunately, I think that dream of if we only have better, when I tell people that I want a better life for Palestinians, they think I'm disingenuous. Like they honestly think that I'm just saying it because it's a talking point. And I'm like, no, don't you understand that if the Palestinians have it good, I'll have it good? Like that's, I see it that way. If it'll be good for them, it'll be good for me. I want it good for everyone. Unfortunately, and what I just said is a very leftist mindset, right? And I'm telling you, that's where I came from. Unfortunately, I think that dream of if we only have better economic conditions for them, if we only, give them whatever, it'll bring to peace. Unfortunately, I no longer truly believe it. I think the better future for the Palestinians has to come from within the Palestinians themselves. It is nothing that Israelis can do at this point because we've tried. We've given them money. We've given them territory. We've given them a Palestinian authority to govern them. We've given them everything that we could give. But if somebody doesn't want to help themselves, there's only so much you can do. And unfortunately, we've come to the point where it's like, what else can we do but defend ourselves? What else do we have left?
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because that was my theory as well, because as I mentioned, my dad is from Gaza and my mom is from Egypt. And my mom's family and Egypt, I lived in Egypt for a few years, is so much more anti-Semitic than my dad and my Gazan family. So much more. And my dad lived in Gaza when there were Israelis there, when people would come from Israel and they'd go to the beach and they'd go to the fishmonger and where it was like normal interactions. He was never anti-Semitic. He wanted his homeland to be a peaceful place. He didn't want the terrorism that was going on there. He was very unhappy with Yasser Arafat and the Muslim Brotherhood and any kind of like Islamic extremism influence. And of course, he has his criticisms about the Israeli government and Netanyahu, etc. But he was never anti-Semitic. But that is not true at all of my Egyptian family. And I've said, I felt like it had a lot to do with people in Egypt have never seen a Jewish person. They've never met a Jewish person. They've never humanized Jewish people. And I was recently speaking to a man from Saudi Arabia, who I'm going to have him on this podcast soon. And when he went to Washington, D.C., he went to a Holocaust memorial. And he said, I walked in the door one man and I walked out the door a completely different man. And I said, what was it like that was so life-changing for you? And he said, I never imagined that a Jewish person could be a victim. Can you imagine? Like never humanized Jewish people to the extent that he could believe that they were actually victims of anything. Because in his mind, they were just this big, all-powerful, evil entity that controlled everything that everybody had to try and bring down because they just wanted to destroy the earth and blah, blah, blah. And all of those old anti-Semitic tropes are not, it's just so normalized and everybody believes it. And nobody, like I said, has ever met a Jewish person or spoken to a Jewish person. And so it's so easy for them to, continue this madness, and there's nothing to counteract it, right? There's no evidence to the contrary. So I completely agree with you. And I completely agree with what you were saying too about this 60 to 70, 80. Let's hope it's that high, right? And I do believe that the people of Gaza, I've been talking a lot with people from Gaza lately, ever since October 7th, a lot more than I did before because I've had a lot of animosity and, my dad and I didn't have the best relationship growing up because him and my mom got divorced and he moved away to Montreal and we were left in Vancouver, and I had a lot of resentment. Because the man my mom married was a horrible person, and I felt like my dad should have been there to protect me. And so whenever he talked about the Gaza issue, I didn't care. I purposefully didn't care because that's important to you. So therefore, I'm not going to care about it because I'm mad at you, And so I never paid attention to it. And I kind of feel since October 7th, I feel so much regret and sadness over, he died suddenly of a heart attack. So there's like issues there with unable to fix that relationship, and then just sadness over his homeland because I know how important all of this was to him. And so I've been doing speaking to a lot of Gazan people and understanding so much more about how they're living. And I truly feel, and this is one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, is there are people in Gaza right now that are non-terrorist supporting people. People like to say like, oh, everybody in Gaza is Hamas and all of Hamas is Gaza, and it's just not true. And there are people, they're supported by an organization called Peace Communications. And they were pleading to Canada and to other countries to give them the funding that they usually give to UNRWA, to give to them instead. So instead of basically supporting terrorists, give the money to us. We want peace with Israelis. And they'd have like these, like enclaves or little bubbles in Gaza. Now, I don't know if anything's going to come out of it, but I feel like that's the way to go. Like, why are we funneling the money to terrorists through UNRWA? Like, let's instead give it to the people who are interested in peace and coexistence, and not just coexistence, but like a fruitful, functioning, prosperous relationship with their neighbors, like the way we are with America, like our open border. Like we could be like that. Like it could be like that. Arabs or Palestinians and Israelis are not that different. Please.
Oh, not at all.
I was watching Fauda and I like nearly fell off my chair. I'm like, that's my dad's family. Like all these people speaking Hebrew right now, they look like my family.
When I travel abroad, I feel closer to the Arabs that are traveling, beside me in the hotel than I do with the Germans.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're so close. And you were the so much, even the language is so similar. So many parts of the culture are so similar. So many of the foods are so similar. So many of the traditions are so similar. You're all, everybody's from that same region. So it's no surprise, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that there's like this black and white, us and them, oppressor, oppressed, blah, blah, blah dichotomy is just so manufactured, because that's not the reality. And Hamas murdered Arab Muslim people on October 7th as well. You know, like at the end of the day, this is not even from their perspective, this isn't about, you know, Arab versus Jew or whatever. They're just like, they will kill anybody who is not one of them, who is not a, a terrorist like them, you know?
Right. I want to share with you a story because I was in Morocco celebrating the 2-year anniversary of the Abraham Accords. And my entire time in Morocco, I felt everywhere I went, and I told people I was from Israel, they were like, oh, so excited, you're Jewish. They were excited, you know, because there's a very good relationship between Moroccans and Jews, you know, for many, many years. And everything was amazing. But on the last day, when we were in the airport on the way back to Israel, we entered this room, and there was a bunch. I was on a delegation. So I was with 2 other friends that were with me on the delegation, and one of them was wearing a kippah on his head. We walked into the room, and there was a group of young, probably 20, 22-year-olds, maybe 5 or 6 of them. And when we walked in, they started saying like, Palestine, Palestine. Mm-hmm. And so the 2 guys that were with me, they were like uncomfortable. They were like, come, let's get out of here. And I was like, no, I'm going to kill them with kindness. So I walked up to them, and I was like, yeah, Palestine, you know, Palestine, I'm from Palestine. Do you know Palestine? And they were looking at me like, what? And I was like, Israel, it's Palestine. It's the same thing, right? Anyways, we had this whole conversation. We ended up becoming, you know, friends. We took a selfie for my story. I showed them my Instagram. I told them that I was like cheering on the Moroccan team in the World Cup, whatever. They ended up taking us, like walking us to our plane and going, bye, Israel, right? And what I learned from that story is that, first of all, obviously, like the humanizing, right? That's first of all, like we're humans. We also like soccer. We can talk about sports. We're cool. But I always like to say it's not Israel or Palestine. I hate when people say, what side are you on? Are you on the Israel side or the Palestine side? And I'm like, no, this is what you don't understand. There is no Israel and Palestine. Or Israel or Palestine. It is Israel and Palestine. We are one. It is the same thing. When people say there is no Israel, or when people say there is no Palestine, I'm like, it's a word. It's literally a word. It's like saying tomato or tomato. We could argue about that forever, but at the end of the day, it's a round red fruit. And that's the same thing about Israel, Palestine. I don't care. If somebody wants to call it Palestine, call it Palestine. I don't care. Do I have a right to live there? Am I free? Am I free to be who I am? Am I free to practice my religion? I don't care what you call it. But at the end of the day, I have people try to like, you know, I'm on that app, as you saw, engaging with people from around the world. So it's called Ami TV. And people will see that I'm from Israel. They'll click on my name and they'll right away go, free Palestine. And I'll go, free Palestine. And they'll be like, what? Doesn't that offend you? And I'll be like, no, I don't care that you say free Palestine. It means nothing. What do you mean when you say free Palestine? That's the question, right? And half these kids have no idea what they're saying when they say free Palestine. Because if you're for you, free Palestine is let's have 2 states side by side in peace and whatever. Great, free Palestine. But if your free Palestine is from the river to the sea, Palestine will be Arab because that's what it is in Arabic, right? Then we have a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that the diaspora Palestinians or the diaspora Arabs, unfortunately, are so far removed from this. And it's just so cool and hip and trendy these days to be hateful. And so that's what they're gravitating towards. It's just not from a place of empathy. It's not from a place of education. It's just what is cool on TikTok. And that's the truth, you know, whether they're of Arab background or not. Like that's just the truth for a lot of kids these days on a lot of campuses or even not on campus, just on social media. They don't care. They don't care about Palestinians. That's what's really important here. Yeah.
It's actually the really Palestinian descent ones that are willing to engage with the Israelis and have a conversation.
Because they have skin in the game.
Exactly. And you know what? You can tell automatically who at these protests is actually a descendant of Palestinians because of that. Because there's so many of them who are like, I've met so many people who are like, I'm like, where? They're like, you're from Israel? I'm like, yeah. They're like, I'm Palestinian. I'm like, oh, where from? They have no idea because they're not. Because they're not. It's like become cool to say you're Palestinian, but no, you're not. Like, where was your dad born? Where were your grandparents born? Oh, my grandfather was born in Saudi Arabia, and my great grandmother was from Syria. Oh, so how are you Palestinian exactly? They make it up, right? They're not. Mm-hmm. They're not actually Palestinian. Mm-hmm. It's like so many people try to push identities on other people, right? Israeli Arabs, when I call them Israeli Arabs, people get so offended and they're like, stop calling them that. They're Palestinian. I literally put up a video yesterday where I was engaging with an Israeli Arab, and he was like, and I asked him, I'm like, do you identify as a Palestinian? And he's like, no, I don't. I'm Israeli, right? And so who are you to give us identities? It's like when people say to me, I'm European. Okay, yes, my land was colonized and my ancestors made it to Europe and lived there for a few generations. Does that make me European? I feel nothing for Romania. I wasn't born there, and my ancestors going way back are not from there. Just because my family had passed through there, I have nothing with Romania. And it's crazy to see how on the one hand, they are trying to push certain identities onto us, and they are trying to pull onto themselves certain identities because they want to be a part of a cause. Because their lives are so miserable and empty that they just want to feel part of stuff.
Yes, that is the unfortunate truth. All right, I'm going to open this up to the audience that we have here. So I'm just going to keep the view as it is. And if you have a question, please go ahead and raise your hand. And I see a bunch of, there's tons and tons of comments in the chat here. And I did not have a chance to read them. So if you did have a question for Ashley in the chat there, please copy and paste it again. Now I'll start paying attention and then I'll read it out to her. Okay, let's start off with Sarah. You're first.
Hi, Yasmine. Hi, Ashley. Thank you so much for doing this. I've been following you ever since we started sending emails and everything else. And your patience is mind-boggling. Like the way you talk to people, I'm sitting there enraged. I'm like, how does she do this? I don't know how you do it. I'm from Iran. So that trauma that you talk about, I always say this on Yasmine's podcast, I'm 42 years old. It feels like I've been fighting for 45 years for my life. That's how I feel. So for you to have that patience and that kindness, and Yasmine does the same thing, like that kindness, I don't understand how, like, this is, to me, this is alien. I'm angry all the time. So I really appreciate what you're doing because you are actually changing lives. I yell at people. Doesn't work that much. The thing is, what I experienced was a gender apartheid. So I actually lived in an apartheid. It's an actual, very real, it's not an imaginary thing. So when people talk about Israel as this is an apartheid, they're like, people can't vote, people have to go through a vote. Well, it's a country. You don't have, like, I don't understand. I really, like, there's borders. Like, of course there's borders. Just because Canada and the US don't have that concept of, like, that doesn't make any sense in the Middle East. You have borders. That's what happens. No, people cannot vote. Yeah, they don't have they don't have a passport. Why should they? Like, the conversation is so weird, and it's not the right word, but it's stupid at this point. Like, do I explain the most basic concepts to people? Because I don't know how to do that. I don't have that patience.
Well, can I jump in?
Sure, of course.
Because I'll tell you what, I do understand when people say what the concept when they're saying apartheid and people don't have the right to vote is they mean that the people, for example, in the West Bank, because they are under essentially a military occupation, that it's not okay that they're not allowed to vote for the Israeli government. But what they fail to accept is that as of Oslo, there is a Palestinian authority that they do have the right to vote to. Unfortunately, it's the Palestinians who don't actually give them that democracy because for the past 16 years, is it, that they haven't had elections, right? Mahmoud Abbas is on like the 50th year of a 4-year term. so that's where they're coming from. It's like they throw these terms because then when you say to them, Israel's not an apartheid, right? We've had an Arab Supreme Court judge who's put a Jewish prime minister and president in jail. That's not an apartheid. And then they say to you, no, the West Bank or Gaza is occupied. And you're like, no, Gaza is not occupied. Ever since 2005, it is not, right? We left, we removed our military. And they're like, no, but you still control the borders. Okay, but what about the border with Egypt? We don't control that border, right? And so they're so brainwashed into their own talking points that they're really not thinking about. They just think that you're being stupid, right? They're so deep into it that they're like, you're being stupid if you don't see that it's an apartheid. And it's like, no, you have to understand that and in terms of like the West Bank, for example, I just want to go into this. People, when you throw back at them, and I do this all the time, speaking about what you asked about the patients, I just very patiently say to them, well, then can you explain to me, please, how you see, for example, areas A, B, and C? And then they're like silent because they don't even know what I'm talking about. And then once they're silent, I'm like, okay, we're calm. Now that you've recognized that you don't know what you're talking about, be quiet and listen. And then, so I always just try to throw out facts that are like way beyond their knowledge level. And that what allows them to like calm down. And then if I see that they're not calm and they're angry or whatever, I will say to them, listen, either we continue in a respectful, way in conversation. If not, there's nothing to talk about. And I can tell you that the thing that saddens me the most is I've reached out to people I can't remember his name right. Ilan Pape's son. I can't remember his first name, but I was asking people at the beginning of Amplify, who would you like to see me debate live online? People are like Ilan Pape, Noam Chomsky, whatever. I've reached out to these people. They don't get back to me. They don't actually want to debate. They don't even want to speak. And I've literally said, like, we don't need to, it doesn't need to be a debate. Let's have a conversation and find out where are the points where we agree, and they're not even willing to engage on that. And so anyways, yeah, sorry, I cut you off in the middle of your question.
Thank you for doing that, because that's basically one part of what I wanted you to talk about how false they are when they talk about apartheid, because I can talk about the gender apartheid thing for hours, but they don't connect the dots. Like to them, it's a different thing. Gender apartheid is not even real. It's something we made up because we like to, they are cosplaying this oppression, and they think we are doing the same thing, and they don't understand the trauma. They don't understand how real it is, and they don't understand the stakes. So thank you for that explanation. Makes it easier. Now, my question is about Agam. And again, this is going to be very emotional, and I understand if you don't want to talk about it, but do you have any updates for how this will, what do you think will happen? Because they talk about deals a lot. Everybody's using these hostages because it's like political chips for them now. Everybody wants to free them, but nobody has a real plan. Everybody talks about the deal. What is the deal? Are you making a deal with Hamas? So what is going to stop? How are you going to stop them from not doing this again? What do you think will happen? How do you think this will work out itself? Like, what are your hopes, or are there actual plans happening, if that makes any sense?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, Sarah, thank you. And I also just want to say quickly now, because I don't want to forget this. I admire Iranian women like beyond words, beyond words. And I've had many people say to me things like, oh, the country that you're at war with, about Iran, right? And things like that. And I always correct people, and I say, we are not at war with the Iranian people.
I love you for that. Thank you. Yes.
Always. Yeah. I always differentiate between the people of Iran and the regime. And so I'm very aware. And I also, on my social media, you just recently started following me, but on my social media before October 7th, I was very vocal about the women of Iran and all the amazing things they're doing too. So just so you know, I wanted to tell you that. In terms of Agam, so I'll just give a little bit of an update about where the deal is sitting right now. So basically, the last thing that I had just seen, now I don't know if this is fake news or not, because unfortunately there's so much fake news online, but I have just an hour ago seen that Hamas, so Israel basically took the deal, and Hamas made all these changes, like 20 changes to the deal, and said that it was willing to do it. And so Israel saw it and then made its like counter tweaks and whatever. And now I just saw that Hamas said no to what Israel said. So I don't know what that means. It could just still be part of the negotiation process. I don't know if it's like an official no now. What I can say in terms of the politics, there is still, unfortunately, and this is the reality, okay, whether it's justified or not, there is still, unfortunately, a large amount of the Israeli population. We cannot believe surveys because every media outlet in Israel puts out a survey that will push whatever agenda they want to push, right? But I would say from my intuition and from what I'm feeling, honestly, it's about 50-50. 50% of the population does not agree to a negotiated deal with Hamas. Well, not this deal, because this deal is asking us to leave the Netzarim corridor, which is super important for us strategically right now, and of course the Philadelphia corridor, which is Hamas's lifeline. Unfortunately, there is that border with Egypt, as we said, and the border, Gaza was not an open air prison because that border with Egypt, maybe above ground was closed, but underground was very, very open. And apparently, I don't know if this is true, maybe Yasmine, maybe you know more about this. Apparently there was like women's trafficking also going on under those tunnels, unfortunately. So, I mean, if Gaza was an open air prison, where are all the rockets coming from? Where are all the Iranian weapons coming from? How's that all getting in, right? It's sort of the open air prison. So we know that unfortunately we also cannot trust the Egyptian government to monitor the Philadelphia route. Like we trusted them with it up until now, and then we got October 7th. And so I know that right now what they're speaking about is that the US will put in sensors, but we saw how relying on technology also didn't help us on October 7th. We had one of the most sophisticated borders and technology and sensors, and they came with tractors and tore down our fences and our walls. And so I understand the Israeli population who says we can't agree to this deal. But there are human beings alive. And also, I think it's really important to say, if we were talking about bodies, because we've had bodies that have been, that are in the hands of Hamas for many years as well, there is obviously, a difference between getting back bodies, which is important, and getting back people who are alive, and especially women and babies, right? Let's not forget there's still two very young children. One is about to celebrate his 5th birthday in captivity. And going back to what I studied, right? So in one of my courses in my master's degree was negotiation with terrorists. And the first thing we learned, and the last thing we learned on the first class and on the last class, was you don't negotiate with terrorists. And then the in-between was, but here are examples in the past where we have negotiated with terrorists and what happened and what didn't. And unfortunately, we are, we have an expression in Hebrew that's like, you sleep in the bed that you made. Like you make your bed and then you have to sleep in it, right? And unfortunately, we are sleeping in the bed that we made years ago with Gilad Shalit, the Israeli soldier that was taken as a hostage. And we ended up releasing, I think it was 1,200 terrorists to get him back. So of course we incentivized Hamas to kidnap us, right? Of course. And so a big fear of the Israeli public is, if we go for this deal and we release all these terrorists with blood on their hands, one of which that we released was Sinwar himself, who orchestrated all of October 7th. So we're just continuing to incentivize them to want to, take more and more of us hostage. And so I understand those people, but what's the other option? That we just allow these people just to stay there, to remain there? Of course not. No civilian will live here and raise their children here if we know that our government doesn't do everything to bring back our people. I won't send my kids to the military to defend the country if I know that the military will not bring them back. And so in terms of the internal politics, I know, because again, I see the media outside and everyone's trying to put the blame on Netanyahu. It's all Netanyahu. It's all Netanyahu. It's not Netanyahu. Netanyahu is unfortunately part of a coalition government, but we've passed the point where radicals on our side, such as Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, if you've heard those names, we are past the point where they can actually stop this deal from happening. The majority of our politicians have already said that they will endorse this deal. And so I hope that the visit to Washington, that what I spoke about just now with Philadelphia and with the Sarim and with the border crossings, for example, that they've spoken, that maybe spoke to Biden, I don't know, there were operative meetings there, and that they're able to find some kind of solution. On a personal note, I don't believe, because we've heard these statements coming out of Israel as well. There's many Israelis who believe that Netanyahu, for his own political purposes, is trying to like prolong this war. He doesn't want to bring home the hostages because he's, he doesn't want to be indicted for all the things that he's going to be indicted for. I don't think that Netanyahu doesn't care about bringing back the hostages. I think he is a Zionist and cares about what's good for the country. I do think that, like any other politician, politics plays a role here. I don't think he's a bad person. I just think that, unfortunately, there is politics. And I will say the same for Israel's left. Israel's left is using the hostages and Bibi's lack of bringing them home for their own political causes as well. And so we're a very politicized country. Everything becomes politics, and that's the way it is here. But at the end of the day, everybody wants to see them home. Every Israeli wants to see them home. Just there's still like 50% of the country who's not willing to sacrifice future generations in order to bring home what we're saying is most likely something like 30 people who are still alive. I hope that answered the question in like the longest way possible. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Yasmine.
Stephen, you're next.
Okay, I guess first I want to just thank the two of you for what you're doing. You both are pretty amazing women. Really, really proud of what you guys are doing. My question for Ashley. So you mentioned the 50 to 60% that you feel are willing to discuss the issue reasonably. Could you just give me a little bit of a flavor of what you have done that has won people over in those situations? What techniques, what methods, how do you do it?
Thank you for asking. And I will say that I've actually started to write a book that will address exactly that, of like how to give people the tools to defend Israel, because there is no book on the market for that today. Some of the things that, well, first of all, I always say, you always acknowledge the other side, like what the other side is saying. You don't like say, no, you have no idea what you're talking about, or educate yourself. Because once you use those terms, the other side stops listening. So I'll always say, I understand why you say that, or given the media or the way the media has presented, I understand why you believe that. But so I'll always start with, to giving the person space to feel safe in the conversation, that I'm not attacking. So that's first of all. And in terms of, there's two tactics that, like, whenever I'm like stuck or in doubt or I don't know where to go, there's two things that I always refer to. One is I always say, okay, what would you do? What's your solution? Okay, I agree with you. I'll just say, like, let's say something's like Israel is committing genocide, Israel's ethnic cleansing, everything. I'll be like, okay, let's just say I agree with you on everything. Let's say I agree. Ethnic cleansing, occupation, genocide, all of it. How do we move forward? What's the solution? And then from their answer, from the response, you see if there's even what to speak, right? Because many people will just say, well, Israel has to, can no longer exist. It has to go back to being Palestine. And then they're like, okay, there's nothing to speak about here. But if the person is like, well, I think that this and this and this, then you can actually start going into conversation about each one of their points, whether you agree or disagree. So always throwing it back to like a question of like, what would you do, right? And most of the time people are like, I don't know. And most of the time they're like, well, I'll tell you what I wouldn't do. And I'm like, well, I didn't ask what you wouldn't do. I'm asking what you would do, because it's very easy to say what you wouldn't do. And then the third thing that I always go back to that always helps me is, and it's true, and I always say it, and it's true. It's not that I'm making anything up. And I say, all right, we've tried to have a Palestinian state many times in the past. It started from the Appeal Commission, UN partition, even after, I think a lot of people don't even know this, but even after like the 6-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, when we gave back the Sinai to Egypt, it was like, well, aren't you going to take Gaza too? And they were like, no, we don't want it, right? And 2000 Camp David with Ehud Barak, 2008 with Ehud Olmert. Like, we've offered so many times. Why have the Palestinians always said no? And then they're stuck because they don't know what to say. And then you say to them, but so is this about a Palestinian state? Because if it was about a Palestinian state and Palestinians' right to self-determination, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. But they've been offered so many times. Why did they say no? And the majority of the people don't even know what happened and that it was offered, or don't know why they said no. Or if you say, well, even in the last time, they didn't even say no. Abbas literally didn't respond. He walked up and left with no response. So, and then when I always go back to those talking points, that's when people are like, they don't know what to say. And I always say, when I engage with people, my ultimate goal is not necessarily to get them to become a Zionist and pro-Israel, but just to acknowledge that maybe they don't actually know what they're talking about. That's enough for me. Because then next time when they're, speaking about whatever, maybe it'll make them like stay quiet in the conversation, because maybe they're like, maybe I don't know everything. And for me, that's a win. If somebody stays quiet, it's a win. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. Michelle, you're next. You're muted, Michelle, if you're talking.
I'm just trying to unmute. Can you hear?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm first time on here. Thank you so much to Yasmine. I read your book last summer and totally changed my perspective. I am a teacher in Canada, so it touched me in a lot of ways. And thank you to Ashley. I've been following you, Ashley, and thank you to the last question, because that was very similar to what I wasn't sure where I was going to go, and that I had that question. I have sort of two things. One is a question, one is a request. Yasmine, you were talking about how, and I think Ashley, you were too, about how this event emboldened a lot of Canadians to sort of be open about their racism, about their anti-Semitism. And I know that when Trump was elected, my husband, who's from India, saw a lot of racists in the US be more emboldened in their racism, be like, we're allowed to just be racist out in the open now. And we were discussing it, going, well, is this better because now we know it exists and we can battle it, and we know who and what people are actually thinking and feeling and believing. Although now, so many years later, I don't know that happened. I don't know that we actually challenged those thoughts, or if those people were just emboldened and stayed there after Trump was elected. So now that we see that with the anti-Semitism movement and it just being emboldened, is it better now that we know, or do we want them to, lack of a better word, go back under the rock they came from? I don't mean like the people, I mean like their ability to be openly like that. What is your opinion on that?
That's a good question. I think it really depends on what the Canadian authorities are willing to do about it. And I think, unfortunately, I'm a very strong critic of Prime Minister Trudeau. And not because I think he's a bad person, I just don't think he is smart enough to deal with the situation. And I think, unfortunately, I'm going to say, I know this is probably not the answer you expected, but I think it would have been better if we didn't know.
Oh, I think that too.
Yeah, I think people would expect me to say, no, it's better that we know, and now we can deal with it, we can make policy, and I think it would have been better if we didn't know, because I think what happened was, like, if we're going back, it was very taboo 10 years ago to be racist or anti-Semitic.
Right.
And once it's no longer taboo, then we are literally living in Germany of 1930, and who knows what's next. And so and again, we know that people have been anti-Semitic ever when the first Jew was created. Anti-Semitism was created, right? And the reason the Holocaust was able to be, right, is because it became the norm. It was okay to burn Jewish establishments. It was okay to push them into ghettos. It was okay. It was politically correct to say this is a Jew-free university. And that's what allowed the educated, good people of Germany to be able to go along with the final solution. And we're not far from that. I mean, I'm looking at Jewish communities around the world, and I'm saying to myself, how are they not all realizing that history is repeating itself? And so, yeah, I think my answer is I think it's actually, it would have been better if we wouldn't have known, because it wouldn't have been okay. It would have remained taboo. Hatred is racism are always going to be there, no matter what the policies. That's human nature. Us as a society, the best that we can do is make it taboo and make it under the rug and under the carpet and not flourish and not trendy. Once it becomes trendy, then it becomes dangerous. That's my opinion. Yasmine, do you have what's your opinion on that?
No, that's a very good point, Ashley. You make a very good argument. I was probably leaning towards saying it's kind of good to know where it is, because then we can address it. But you made some very compelling arguments, so yeah, I won't make my point because I'm thinking about yours. You're right. That's exactly how the Holocaust was able to happen, was because it just became so normalized, it became so encouraged, and it wasn't just the hateful people that were empowered, it was the useful idiots and the uneducated and the clueless that were also pulled into it. So in fact, it made it a lot bigger, and it was emboldened it a lot more than if it were just the racists behind, under rocks and under rugs. So yeah. Great question, Michelle.
Thanks. I was also debating the same thing, like, is it better to know? But I like the idea that it's taboo because, again, I think what Ashley said, it just leads to violence instead of us actually tackling it. The other one is just a request. You both spoke about organizations, like grassroots organizations in the area that we can support. And I would love it if, even if when you publish it, you could put it in the comments so we can click on the links, or just names of grassroots cross, like, Palestinian Israeli organizations that are going towards peace that we can support and we can promote, rather than just the politicized ones that we know about. And if you could do that, or if you have some that you recommend.
Yeah, for sure. I'll just let you know real quick about Peace Communications. So they do a campaign called Voices from Gaza. So of course, people can't show their faces, but they do leave voice notes, and then they animate what the person is saying. So they do a really great job of bringing out voices of silenced people it's very dangerous for them to speak their feelings. And they are behind the younger generation, because as you know, much like the Palestinian Authority, obviously under Hamas, there's not going to be there's no democracy, there's no voting going on. And so a lot of the people there never voted for Hamas, and here they are having to live under them. And so a lot of the younger generation are wanting to start their own grassroots, pro-peace Palestine. And so they're working with Peace Communications to that end. So yeah, I'll definitely post it for everybody else too. Another great question. Thank you, Michelle. Did you have one that you wanted to add as well, Ashley?
It's not a Palestinian Israeli organization, but I will mention an organization that I love called Sharaka. Have you heard of them, Yasmine?
Yes, I did Holocaust education with Sharaka.
Okay, amazing. So I love them because they're, looking big picture also, and Abraham Accords relations, basically Arab-Jew relations, not only Palestinians. And I think it's also really important because I just met with a delegation that came from Morocco that's doing amazing work. And so it's just, important in general to get more of the younger generation support in the surrounding Arab countries. And specifically also so that the good work that has been done with the Abraham Accords remains. So that, God forbid, we don't lose that good work that happens. So that's another organization I really like as well.
Great. David, you're next. David Cohen.
Okay. My voice is a bit weak, so let me know if you have any problems hearing me. Firstly, Ashley, if you're interested in debating Ilan Pape, I may be able to help. I'm part of a small group in Melbourne, and we're organising a discussion panel on the future of Zionism, and his name's been contacted and may be on it. It's a bit of a verbal feast, but if you're interested, please put your name in the email and chat, and we'll stay in touch and we'll see what happens.
Okay.
The other thing is, you may have noticed I've passed some information on the Quran. I'm a very difficult person. I believe in facts, even if they're inconvenient. And a simple fact is there are deficiencies in the Quran that produce problems in Muslim societies. Certainly the deficiencies are there. We may debate over the cause or effect relationship, but it's pretty clear, I think. Anyway, I think it's important to know what they are. There may be nothing you can do with the knowledge, but I think it's important to have that knowledge. Anyway, I'll pass that to you and do with it what you want. If anybody else wants to know about problems with the Quran, put their email in the chat and I'll enlighten you with this kryptonite information. Okay?
Great. Thank you, David.
Yep.
Evan, you're next.
Okay. So one of the things is, what do you think can be done to sort of like fix sort of the leftist narrative about it? Because one of the things that's the issues with like what's the modern leftism is that it seems to be that they've taken what should be in principle leftman should be about like, helping those who are less fortunate, making society fairer and more equal. It seems to distort it when the prison, right? That part has gone into the prison and out they've sort of distorted it into sort of like a hatred of anything that's influential, powerful, or successful, anything that has sort of like done it. So I mean, so almost as such stuff like, they were like on the side of the Jews like during the 1930s and 40s, but after 1948, it's sort of like become sort of like demon and sort of like among the leftists, it's very hard to sort of like keep optimistic when you get too far in the leftist circles. And probably it's my bad even like doing this. Maybe I shouldn't even be like looking in these circles because it's like bad for your mental health. But it's like, but some of them it's like they honestly can't even. Some of them can't even like accept the fact that there's actually sex or so. I mean, like rape folks is actually a thing amongst them, and some of them they actually believe that at best. The idea of sort of like acting was the same conduct as sort of like Hamas after October 7th. And at worst, I find that they say that Israel's trying to conduct a final solution. So the issue is, what can be done is we sort of like fix this stuff with it. It's like they feel they have to have this irrational issues towards anything that's powerful or influential. What can be done to sort of fix that so they can address this more rationally, if this makes sense?
That's a big question for you, Ashley.
Yeah. So unfortunately, what you describe here is really, it's essentially Soviet propaganda and Marxist propaganda that was able to infiltrate to the West. And you're right, it's basically, it's a narrative of if you're white, you're bad. Everything is oppressor against oppressed. And if you look at things from those lenses, then it's very easy to make the case that that Israel is the big bad wolf and the poor Palestinians are, the oppressed and all that. The only way, I won't even say the only way, but like, the only way you might be able to reach these people who have been so badly affected with with infected with like this mindset of everything in their world is from those lenses, everything. And it ranges from the way they see the banking systems, and it's the way they, about the COVID, right? Everything's a conspiracy. Like I'm talking about the extreme ones. If you're even able to reach these people, because unfortunately, I think many of them, they won't engage with you. But if you're even able to reach them, I would really switch it around, and I would say to them, can you explain to me how, no, you know what I would say to some people? I understand that you think that Israel is the oppressor, right? Try to make the claim right now that Israel is not the oppressor. Are you able to do it? And of course they're going to be able to do it because they've heard the talking points of the other side. They're going to say, well, Israelis would say that they've been that they came from Judea, that they were kicked out, that they've been persecuted, that they've been that. And then you said, well, there you go. Well, then there you go. You just answer the question for yourself, because they know that if they're really into it, then they know the pro-Israel talking points. But another thing that I also say, and this is, again, I have to always remember, right, that you guys live in North America, things are different. People in North America have been brainwashed to believe that all Jews come from Europe, that all Jews are wealthy, that all Jews are, the stereotypical Jewish person that they see in a Hollywood film with the curly brown hair and the quirky laugh and a little bit nerdy. And if they're willing to listen to facts, then just stating very simple facts it proves their whole narrative to be false. The whole thing from the get-go. Okay, so you want to talk about Jews in general, right? Are we talking about North American Jews right now, or Jews? Because if we're talking about Jews, I definitely wouldn't call the Jews who escaped Ethiopia to find, a safe haven in their ancestral homeland of Israel. I definitely wouldn't call them white privilege and oppressors. I also definitely wouldn't call the Iraqi Jews, my husband is Iraqi, the Iraqi Jews who fled the Farhud in the 1950s, I wouldn't call them white, European colonizers or oppressive. So who are you calling? Because the majority, like Israel is made up, actually the majority of Israel are not of European descent. So who are you talking about when you say Jews? And so if you're talking about North American Jews, are you, right? And I would always try to bring those people to like really define, because it's very easy to get wrapped up in their overstimulated conspiracy theories when they're generalizing. When we bring the conversation into very specific and we try to define what are we actually talking about, then their whole worldview comes crumbling down. Because how can Israel be an oppressive country when it doesn't even have the military freedom to create its own weaponry? Many people don't know that. They're like, Israel, it's what was I saying? That Israel is at the mercy of the United States. How can we, right? We can't. We wanted to develop our own fighter jets. U.S. came and said, no. If you want to be our allies, you're not allowed to do that. We have no independence and no freedom, in fact. How can Israel be considered the aggressor when it is a sliver of the Middle East surrounded by people that want to annihilate them? Israel's establishment and founding was created through war when it was attacked by 7 surrounding armies, and including from Palestinian militias within Israel, and survived miraculously. Israel is the greatest story of decolonization, right? So if we stick to facts, that's the only way. But again, that is only if these people who are so deep into their conspiracy theories about Jews running the world are even willing to listen. And unfortunately, we are in a time, and this goes back to all the other questions and all the other things we spoke about before, is unfortunately we're in a time where it's no longer taboo to say these conspiracy theories like out loud, that Jews run the banks, Jews run the media, Jews control all the money of Washington. And I love when people say those things, because I'm like, oh yeah, well, clearly the media is, you know, very pro-Israel. What are you talking about? How could you say that? Unfortunately, there's so many people who are so wrapped up into it, and they won't get out of it until it hits home for them. And I think that, again, if we're looking at the younger generation in North America, we have to remember that, unfortunately, or fortunately, we should say, actually, this is a generation that didn't live through 9/11 or doesn't remember 9/11. So nothing like this has ever hit home for them. You see the demographic differences in the polling of support for Israel between the older generation and the younger generation, because the older generation has lived through it. It remembers the Madrid bombing. It remembers the Bataclan. It remembers Oslo. It remembers the Intifadas. This younger generation on campuses, they don't even know. They don't remember. It's so far away from them. They really are the definition of white privilege. I actually had, so one of my friends right now, he went to Washington to film content, and he was engaging with the pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas, I should say, rallies. And he's half Moroccan, half Yemenite Jew, not white looking at all. And he's going up to this like American girl, and he's like, you want to engage? I want to engage. How are you not even willing to engage with me? And she looks at him and she goes, then fuck off, white boy. She's like the whitest American girl you've ever seen. And he's clearly Middle Eastern. Like, what? And they're so brainwashed that because the guy is holding an Israeli flag, he's a white boy, when the guy is clearly not a white boy. So people like that, there's no point. There's really no point. They're like gone. They're gone. And one day, hopefully, they'll wake up from their dream.
Yeah.
I hope that answered your question. It's a tough question. So
thanks for the question, Evan. So, and thank you, Ashley, because I asked you if you could talk for an hour and a half, and I just made you talk for 2 hours. So we definitely have to let you go now. But before we do, I just wanted to make sure you got the last word to conclude. Let us know, like, you know, what are some parting words? What is some advice you have for us? Or let us know where we can follow you. Of course, I will be posting your Instagram in the description below this video as well.
Thank you. Honestly, I want to conclude with thanking you, Yasmine, because I've also been watching your podcast on YouTube, and I've seen the amazing things that you're doing and how brave you are and how refreshing it is to know that there are people who see the truth and who are getting these voices that are not heard out there. And, you know, one episode for me that you did, which was so fascinating, was the episode that you did with the young Palestinian man who spoke about the We Want to Live Now protest.
Hamza.
And yeah, Hamza. And I just think that, you know, people like us who are like-minded, who want to see a better future, a better world, want to push away all that hate and negativity and darkness and Middle Ages darkness, we have to stay united and stay in contact and stay in touch and do more and more projects together and strengthen each other and embolden each other and show the world one of the things that I'm trying to do on social media right now, because there's so many videos out there of people showing the people at the protests and their hate and the rage. And basically what these videos are doing, because people are trying to showcase to the world the anti-Semitism and the hate, but in fact, what they're doing is they're legitimizing, going back to Michelle's question, they're legitimizing the regular people at home to be like, well, if they're doing that out loud, then it's okay if I do that out loud too. So I'm not doing that. I'm trying to use my platform to show the young Muslim guy that you saw that at the end we're all good human beings, and to show the world that they are the ones who are not okay, that we're the ones that are okay. And I think that if we just keep doing that, we'll win, because I truly believe that good will always win over evil. And if there's something that I told you I never believed in God or whatever, but since Agam was taken hostage and hearing her And her belief and her being defiant there has actually made me start to like light the Shabbat candles. And I've started to go to synagogue on Shabbat. And I've started to be like reconnecting with my spirituality and with my tradition and my culture and my heritage through that. And if there's something that I've learned, is that the Jewish people really are truly resilient, and we've been through so much that we're going to get through this too. Yeah. We've been around the block when so many people have tried to eliminate us from the face of the earth, and the reason that we call ourselves the Eternal Nation is because our purpose, we believe that our purpose in this world is to be a light in the world. And so I truly believe that every individual who takes upon themselves to be a light in the world will win. Whether you believe it from like a karma perspective or from a religious perspective or just from like a good energy, good vibes perspective, I really do believe that. And so, Yasmine, you are one of the people who really, truly are a light in this world. And I don't want to embarrass you, but you need to hear it, because I don't hear enough of your guests that come on say it. You are a light. You are, I hope to see people like you. Like, what you're doing is amazing, but people like you need to be heard more and louder. So all the people who are watching this video now, share Yasmine, because she needs to be like so much more heard. She needs to be echoed in every single room and everywhere. So thank you. And thanks for inviting me on, and just keep doing what you're doing. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And right back at you. And I am very grateful to you for all the work that you're doing, the humanitarian work that you're doing while you are currently in trauma. I mean, there's no words to describe how much I admire you for being able to do that. I know how difficult it is. I mean, I actually can't imagine how difficult it is. And I'm very grateful to you for being able to do that, to be such a light despite all the darkness that's surrounding you. So thank you so much, Ashley. And thank you everyone who's come here to listen to Ashley today. And I hope you'll all follow her on Instagram and continue to be inspired by her beautiful work.
After hearing all that, you might be left wondering, what can I do? How can I help? Well, this is why I created a nonprofit called Free Hearts, Free Minds. We are the only organization dedicated exclusively to helping these free thinkers. We empower them with our programs and supportive community, lifting them up so they can heal, speak out, and begin to make positive changes, not just in their own lives, but within the broader community around them. If this is a cause that resonates with you and you want to make a difference, one way to do that is by donating to Free Hearts, Free Minds. Because not enough people care about this cause, we need people like you to help fuel this change. You can donate via our website, freeheartsfreeminds.com. Thank you. Every dollar you donate makes a difference.